In 2015, the Chinese government published a document. Most Western governments didn't read it carefully. That was a mistake. The document was called Made in China 2025, and it was, in plain language, a blueprint to make China the dominant manufacturer in the 10 industries that will define the 21st century economy, from semiconductors and electric vehicles to robotics, aerospace, and biotechnology. In 2018, during the first Trump-China trade war, China quietly stopped using the phrase in official communications. The branding disappeared. The program did not. It accelerated. 10 years after that document was published, the results are in, and they are more consequential than anything published in a government plan in decades. China now dominates key green technologies, over 75% of global lithium-ion battery manufacturing and nearly 80% of solar module production. It controls the commanding heights of the electric vehicle industry. Its shipbuilding capacity dwarfs every competitor. Its high-speed rail network is more extensive than the rest of the world's combined. This is not an accident. It is the result of the most ambitious, most disciplined, and most consequential industrial strategy ever executed by a modern state. And it's not finished. To understand China's strategy for global trade dominance, you have to understand what Made in China 2025 actually was and why it mattered far more than Western governments initially grasped. For decades, China's economic model was simple and extraordinarily effective. Be the world's factory. Assemble foreign-designed goods, accept low margins, compete on labor cost. It worked spectacularly. China lifted 800 million people out of poverty. It became the world's second-largest economy. But by the early 2010s, Chinese leaders could see that model had limits. Wages were rising. The easy demographic dividend was ending, and most importantly, China was assembling the world's products, but it wasn't inventing them. It was at the bottom of the global value chain, doing the labor-intensive work while Western and Japanese and Korean companies captured the high-margin technology and design profits. Made in China 2025 was the strategy to change that. Its goal was explicit. Move China up the global value chain in 10 specific, strategically chosen industries: semiconductors, advanced robotics, aerospace equipment, maritime engineering, rail transportation, new energy vehicles, electricity generation equipment, agricultural machinery, new materials, and biopharma. Its key objective was, in a world it views as increasingly dominated by US-China competition, to identify key technologies, indigenize them with the help of national champions, secure market share domestically, and ultimately capture foreign markets globally. The instrument was state power at a scale that has no Western equivalent. Government subsidies, state bank loans, directed investment, forced technology transfer requirements for foreign companies seeking access to China's market, and the systematic acquisition, through purchase, partnership, and in some documented cases theft, of foreign technology and intellectual property. The program continued under alternative frameworks such as high-quality growth and dual circulation, backed by ever larger subsidies, import substitution policies, and a growing emphasis on economic securitization. The branding changed, the ambition did not. A decade after Made in China 2025 was launched, the scorecard is in, and the results are, depending on your perspective, either impressive or alarming, or both. Of the 10 strategic sectors highlighted in the program, China has achieved technological dominance in shipbuilding, high-speed rail, and electric vehicles. Let's be specific about what dominance means here, because it is not a rhetorical flourish. In electric vehicles, China now produces more than half of all EVs sold globally. BYD overtook Tesla as the world's largest EV seller. Chinese EV companies have expanded into Europe, Southeast Asia, and Latin America at prices that European and American manufacturers structurally cannot match because Chinese companies benefit from state subsidies at every point in the supply chain. In solar energy, China produces nearly 80% of the world's solar panels, controls the majority of global polysilicon production, and has driven solar costs down so dramatically that solar is now the cheapest electricity source in history. Western solar manufacturers largely been wiped out, unable to compete with Chinese pricing. In batteries, Chinese companies, led by CATL, control more than 75% of global lithium-ion battery manufacturing. Every EV, every grid-scale storage, every consumer electronic on Earth is overwhelmingly dependent on Chinese battery supply chains. In shipbuilding, China now builds roughly 55% of the world's ships by tonnage, more than South Korea and Japan combined. The U.S. commercial shipbuilding industry, which once dominated the seas, is functionally non-existent. In drones, China has achieved global leadership in unmanned aerial vehicles. DJI has roughly 70% of the global consumer drone market. Chinese military drone technology has proliferated to conflict zones on multiple continents. Overall, between 60 and 70% of the targets on the original MiC-25 list have been met and in several cases surpassed. The sectors where China fell short, advanced semiconductors, aerospace, and biopharma, are precisely the sectors where Western export controls and technology restrictions have been most aggressive, which tells you something important. The strategy works, but it can be slowed where the West chooses to defend. Dominating the end products, the cars, the panels, the ships, is one layer of China's trade control strategy. But there's a deeper layer, structural one, underneath it, and it is arguably more powerful. China's control of the raw materials and processing capacity that every industry depends on. China controls approximately 60% of global rare earth mining, but that figure understates the real leverage. China controls over 85% of global rare earth processing and refining, meaning that even where rare earth minerals are mined elsewhere, they typically come to China to be processed into usable materials before they go anywhere else. Every advanced technology system of the 21st century runs on these materials, and China controls the tap. In 2025, Beijing turned that tap. China's expanded rare earth export restrictions announced on October 9, 2025, added 5 more elements to its controlled list and imposed new foreign direct product rules. China constructed an extensive enforcement system to ensure transparency and compliance throughout global supply chains. This was not an isolated move. It was the latest escalation in a systematic policy of weaponizing China's processing dominance. The Chinese Ministry of Commerce also introduced new export permit requirements for high-performance lithium-ion batteries and cathode materials, constraining the localization of next-generation energy storage production in the United States, Japan, and Europe. The logic is coldly rational. China has invested decades and hundreds of billions of dollars in building dominance in processing capacity. Using that dominance as leverage in trade disputes is simply deploying an asset it paid to build. The Pentagon has classified rare earth dependency as a national security crisis. The F-35 fighter jet contains significant quantities of rare earth elements, missile guidance systems, radar arrays, advanced weaponry.
That is the leverage point China is systematically building. Not military force, not imperial administration. Commercial dependency, technology lock-in, and infrastructure ownership accumulated over decades, one contract at a time, in a strategy that was written down in a government document in 2015 and has been executed with a consistency and scale that democracies, with their 4-year electoral cycles and their contested industrial policies, have found genuinely difficult to match. China's plan to control global trade was never really a secret. It was published, it was announced, it was discussed in academic papers and think tank reports for years before Western governments took it seriously. What made it a secret was not that China hid it, it was that the West chose not to look, because the goods were cheap, the investment was welcome, and the strategic implications were uncomfortable to confront. That era of comfortable inattention is over. The trade war, the chip war, the EV tariff war, the rare earth export controls, the infrastructure competition in the global south, these are all chapters in the same story. The story of a world rearranging itself around the competition between two visions of how global trade should be organized. China's vision is clear: an economy that makes what the world needs, that controls the supply chains those products depend on, and that converts that commercial power into geopolitical weight. If this gave you a clearer picture of what's actually happening in global trade, subscribe. Every week we analyze the forces reshaping the world economy. Drop a comment. Do you think the West can still compete with China's industrial strategy? Thank you for watching. See you in the next videos.